So I have a question for you. Do you remember the last time that you were making music or doing sound design or something and you had a note to yourself where you were like, I'm having fun? For me, it's very easy for that to become less and less and have longer intervals in between because as we get better at things, our expectations begin to increase. It's a very difficult relationship to balance because we want to be our best. And that's kind of the pursuit of doing anything that is artistic or that has no ceiling, right? Because in essence, when it comes into anything any skill, anything that doesn't have a cap, your potential is limitless. And that's a beautiful thing. But a lot of times it's always really fun and then progress halts. Sometimes you feel like you're doing this and it slows down, or sometimes you feel like you're taking steps backward, and you really have to start asking yourself of like, man, do I even like doing this anymore? Am I having fun? Am I not having fun? And yeah, I think that I wanted to make this video to kind of just relate to people. Somebody had actually asked me in the Discord on whether or not I had something like this, and I figured that I would give you my thoughts and kind of share with you on that of how to not be so hard on yourself, because it's inevitable, especially like the second you start taking something that you do any kind of to any kind of serious degree, it's going to happen. You know, when I got started getting good at tricking, started being hard on myself. When I started getting into martial arts, actually, thankfully, I didn't have to be hard on myself because I had somebody to be hard on me, Sifu Joel. When I was doing music production, it was just me. And so, like, I was my own teacher. And I think that's one of the big things that I'll open with here in a second. But because I was my own teacher and tricking as well, it's like, you are only as good as your worst student. And if your only student is you, and you're not up to your own, like, you know what I mean, you're not the best, or you're not whatever, then like, yeah, man, it's a very easy trap to fall into. I wanted to talk about this because it happens, and I think that it's something that really can push somebody out of the craft that they're doing, especially if it gets worse. And all of these things of being hard on yourself lead into all of these other problems like beat block, creative block, or, feeling not motivated, or, all the things that we never really want to deal with whenever it comes into us having to do really anything. You could be like good at your job, but maybe you're not progressing as fast as your colleague or something, and then you're like in the same position. So it's not exclusive to music production, or it's not exclusive to art. Now that I think about it, it's just anything that, if you have any kind of competitive spirit whatsoever, it's going to happen. So I do want to, just sit and identify the problem with you all, or identify the mutual feeling that we all share. But I also want to provide solutions, because I don't like to bring up problems without talking about, hey, like, here are some things to try. Sometimes when you just put the problem out there in its own right, like speaking about it as if I am now. And whenever I talk to you, the camera, YouTube, whoever, I'm pretty much talking to myself. That's okay to do, by the way. If you're ever having a conversation when you're driving with yourself and you are like, man, I'm so mad, I'm so frustrated, something that's like not necessarily a self-help, but just a better self-awareness thing, like it helps you recenter, is having those conversations with yourself sometimes out loud. Just make sure that nobody's looking, or who cares, whatever. Once you are able to do that, and people ask me all the time, they're like, oh, well, you think that you have your creative block because of this. You think you have your creative block because of that. And I'm like, no, I know what it is. I know that I'm not getting to let's say, the aesthetic at the time that I was working on. And that's what frustrates me, because I put all this time into bass design. I put all this time into drum design, and it still is not coming out the way that I wanted to. Okay, why is it not coming out the way that I wanted to? And then I go back, and then I dig deeper, and I dig deeper, and I dig deeper. Forgive me, because this conversation might go a little bit tangential in certain cases, but something that I wanted to bring up with that was that now, instead of me being necessarily hard on myself, I'm actually exploring a path, and there's a call to action on that. And rather than trying to be like making judgment calls based off of, is this good or is this bad? It's more about, is this aligning with my artistic vision? Is this aligning with my direction of development? And that is a very different conversation that has its own set of problems, I guess, but really gets you into thinking about different stuff. Whenever you find yourself being hard on yourself, I think that obviously the first question to ask yourself is why. Are the stakes really high? Um, is there something external that you are relying, this is a big one, is there something external that you are relying on whatever your craft is as an escape? And when your escape is not satisfying you, it makes the other things become more apparent. Because for me, for a long time, and still in some cases, it's music production and tricking. you know I can always throw a jab, I can always practice that, I can sit in one spot for hours and just do this and not think about anything. It's more of a meditative thing for me when it comes into training and cultivation in martial arts than it is for, like, am I good or am I bad? Even if I were to be sparring or something and then, like, I have a crappy day and someone kicks the crap out of me, it's something that I still learn from, and my perspective on the matter is so different. But if I'm like, man, I had a really bad day, and if I don't make a really fire beat today, then I'm going to, like, hate life. That's a problem. Man, I feel like crap today, so I'm going to go to the gym and I'm going to try to hit my double full swing, double full. And if I don't hit it, then I'm going to have a crap day and I'm going to crash out. That is the unhealthy thing. That is also a thing that I think most people aren't really aware of, or they shun away from the fact of the matter. The happiest creators I know are the ones that are the most casual. Isn't that crazy? And that's really interesting to think about. And my statement is an observation. I'm not stating that as a fact. It's just something that I've personally noticed within the friends and whatever in my life. But, like, yo, you ever watch, like, some kids play Super Smash Brothers, but with items? They're having a freaking blast. But then you start getting into your sweats and stuff, and you start taking it all serious because you have to win. You take the items out, you take the randomness out, you take all of this other stuff, and you become more closed-minded. You become more narrow in what it is. And sometimes, in order to be proficient at something, you have to have that. You have to have extreme focus. But losing that openness, I guess, for lack of better vocabulary, losing that will to be bad, losing that will to, not be, I guess, like, becoming fearful of failing, I think is probably one of the fastest killers to anything. And when you put yourself on a metric system or on a metric scale or whatever, on, is it like chi? No, then it sucks. Is one of the most dangerous things that you can do within your own music, within your own craft, within your own stuff. Because obviously this is a music channel, but, like, I do lots of stuff, and I'm hoping that this helps somebody else out one day. I think that it's important to have a little bit of hardness on yourself, but it should be for the sake of cultivating accountability, as opposed to, either you swim or drown. You know what I mean? Because that's a very dangerous relationship that is, like, one of the fastest ways to kill your spirit. And for me, my whole journey with a lot of these things, with overcoming problems and, having, dealing with hardship and stuff, is to have a spirit that's indomitable, to be able to be willing to overcome stuff, to be willing to, you know figure out how to pick my battles, but find peace from whatever happens from those battles. And I'm not talking about physically, I'm talking about with my own mental gymnastics. I'm talking about, I'm working on a remix and it's just not working out. you know am I going to, like, flop my ego and be like, oh my gosh, why am I not able to do this? Why am I not succeeding? Or, like, why does this sound like Dookie? Or am I going to be like, you know what? Some of this stuff is cool. Let me re-grab whatever I like from this project, and then I'm going to start again. Because I actually just did that. And I'm trying to use this as an example of not saying be like me, because that's not really what I'm about. I still deal with this stuff. All the problems that you're probably having right now, I still go through. But these are good case studies about how I was able to kind of get through it. And the best way that I can explain that is through my own experience. So please don't take this for being, like, cocky or something. But I did that, though. I started 2 remixes for Venus Theory, and none of them were working. In fact, when I was doing the remix for The Pretty Wild, I think I started a project like 6 times. Now that I think about it, when I did G Space's remix, I had like 6 different versions and I didn't like any of them. It wasn't until I got to the 7th version that I was like, okay, I actually like what I'm doing here. And having that understanding of the bigger picture is one of the easiest ways to get yourself out of, why am I being so hard on myself? Does that make sense? The bigger picture of, it's not even about the project. The project is whatever. Right now, a lot of times when people are producing, and I'm guilty of this as well, it's like, man, I really need to make something good. Being a streamer, right? This is something that I've talked about with my friends a lot. Being a streamer, some people are like, man, if I don't cook online, nobody's going to care, whatever. Dude, first of all, like whenever I stream, on a really good day, I might have 30 people in there. Most days I've got 7. And those are just the hangout buddies, the people that are my ride or dies, which thank you all, by the way. You guys are awesome. And I really appreciate that I have an audience to hang out with. But you know what I'm saying? So they're just there to hang out. They don't even care what I'm doing. I could be playing games or I could be picking my nose and they'd probably still have, still be around to kick it. I don't do that, by the way, but at least not on stream. But yeah, being hard on yourself is something that you need to understand why, or when and where rather, to be hard on yourself and to work on yourself. But there needs to be a call of action, or call to action rather, of how to understand the lessons and the value of the time that you put in. I think that's my biggest one, is when something isn't working. Let's say I spend 30 minutes on a bass or whatever and I just can't figure it out. Yeah, I feel like I wasted my time, but I didn't. I did 30 minutes of searching and it wasn't really working out. You're not a machine. That's something that Corey says all the time to me. You're not a machine. And whether it's sound design or beat creation or playing an instrument or whatever, like, you are a creature of air and things are going to take time to develop. And sometimes you have to search beyond your capacity of what you're willing to put in. And if you don't have that mindset coming into those things, you don't have the patience, you don't have, the fortitude, that's where you fall short. And I think that's where the disappointment comes in. It's really freaking crazy too. And I kind of want to talk about this as well, because I don't even know how to say this in the way that I want to, but I'm sorry. All right, let me just say it. I can make a trap beat in 15 minutes, right? I can make a hip hop beat, a sampled beat in 15 minutes. And a lot of people wouldn't know the difference between a fully featured production versus something that I put hours and hours and hours and hours and hours into. If I'm doing sometimes, a halftime track, or I'll say like the things that take most of the time for my production aspect are when I'm doing things that are heavily musical, so I'm doing lots of resampling, getting new instrumentation and just like stacking instruments like that. Those kinds of tracks take forever. But let's be real, Splice exists. What is it? Output Arcade, whatever, all of those tools, Unison Audio, heaven forbid, which please don't buy that. Those chords exist on the internet for free. But there's all of these tools and all of these resources to be like, I need to make something today. And I think that something that, especially when it comes into making music, we're not aware of what the required input is to get the result that we want, both from an artistic standpoint and from a technical standpoint. Like, how do you ever talk to people about how long they spend on their tracks? Would you be shocked to learn that most of the time, most of the tracks that I do are done within 3 days? And it shows. All of my music has flaws in it, and I realize that in small things. But when you're listening to it the first time, you usually don't catch it. But yeah, I mean, if you look at the things that I've put up recently, I did a remix for Flying Lotus, not an official one. I did the Andrew Huang project. I did the Venus Theory project. And then I did an original project that I did most of those on stream. But they all came together in 1 to 2 days with about 4 hours of time working in. And sometimes it happens even faster, especially if I'm just making something where I'm, resampling a melody or something. But the speed of whenever I'm working, whenever I'm on, is very fast. But there's also tracks that I hear, like I watched an AU5 video the other day, and he was like, yeah, I've been working on this track for 6 months. 6 months. And you have to kind of ask yourself, would you be willing to work on a single project for 6 months? I personally wouldn't, most likely. And that's not to say like I've started a project, left it for a year or two, and then came back to it and finished it. But dude, like 6 months, right? I don't even know what that entails, but I don't have the capacity for that personally because I'm too impatient. I'm not ADHD. I'm impatient. let's let's be real here. And I think that's important to realize, and looking at the grander scope of things about what is required of you to make your masterpiece or whatever. If you look at Michelangelo, when he made the Sistine Chapel, I mean, that took what? At least a decade, right? To paint the whole thing. And I don't think that he was, being like, I'm not going to paint today because I don't like the way that my clouds are shaped. He probably was just like, you know what I mean? And kept stabbing at it and kept, just working on that specific thing just because he was compelled to do it. And that's going to lead me to my next point. I make music because I'm compelled to, whether it's fun or not anymore. My channel, while I have 1,000 plus reviews or 1,000 plus videos of tutorials and whatnot, I wanted to make sure that the identity of this channel was about making music and not, oh, let me show you how I took this loop and did whatever, or, something stupid like that. It's not a knock towards other creators, but it's something that is a big value within this channel. You, as a viewer, fan, homie, friend, whatever, have the ability to see everything, almost everything, about my artistry when it comes into music production from the last 7 years. If you look at my live streams, you get to see my highs, you get to see my lows, especially if you look at 2020 area, lows, man, freaking lows. And my progress has been all over the place. What I've learned is that sometimes you can't help how you feel. You're going to get mad at yourself. You're going to be like, what the heck am I doing? Why is this so difficult? Like yesterday I was making kicks and I was like, I want my kicks to be -6, but I couldn't get it to be where it didn't sound overblown out and whatever. And I was like, what am I doing wrong? I make kicks every freaking day. I just quit. I started doing something different because sometimes that's what you need, is to just walk away and just be like, whatever, bro, and come back to it at another time. Sometimes you need to sit down and hammer it out, but that's part of the individualism. That's part of your own personal journey. And the more that you become aware of these things, the more that you're going to figure out how to solve all these problems yourself. And if you're in this rut where for whatever reason you haven't been able to make a good kick in 2 years or something, that's where you pay somebody to be like, hey, can you show me what you know about kicks? I understand that some people are like, yo, I can't afford lessons or whatever, but like if this is if this is the thing that's holding you back from making music, I think that you can save up $40, $50, $60, whatever, to have an hour session with somebody to just talk about these specific things. And then you have a new problem to get frustrated about, right? Because that's how music production works. Couple of things. When you are feeling upset with yourself, a lot of times, at least for me, it's because the thing that I'm trying to escape to is becoming an obstacle. And so having multiple hobbies is such a good thing. And you need to have a hobby that is not based on skill. So hobby could be like bird watching, or going outside and hiking, or spending time with your dog, or you know what I mean? Something that is not skill based, something that is just out of appreciation, I think, or admiration. Because when you go to those things, it takes you out of the activity. And I'm not talking about TV and I'm not talking about YouTube, but it needs to be something that could be open-ended, something that is more about reflection or something that makes you think or something that inspires curiosity. Listening to music. Do you all still do that? I feel like most people aren't even listening to music these days anymore. Go listen to some shit. Search for finding a new source of inspiration. The other thing is accepting that because we are people with egos, you know, um, my black belt test was about destroying my ego, and I got my ass kicked. It was like a 6 hour test between 2 days. Well, day one was like an hour and a half, and then day two was like 4+ hours. I ended up going to the hospital, but I got my ass kicked, man. Straight up. I got my ass whooped. And it was a great time. But what I learned from that was I can't solve every problem. I can't protect everyone. I can't, there are some fights that I'm not going to be able to win. And is that going to stop me from training? No, because maybe I can't win every fight, but I might be able to win 90% of them. I'd still rather win 60% than 50%. You know what I'm saying? It changes things. And you start having a different relationship with your ego. My point to that story, though, was that I still have an ego. I still get upset about shit. I still, have an expectation for myself that I'm like, I should be good at this. I could do this, whatever. It's part of life. But doing things that take you out of that, that doesn't break down your, that doesn't break down your spirit, is kind of the management part. The part where it's like, yo, I keep losing at Mario Kart and it's some bullshit and whatever, this is true, by the way. And rather than be like, oh, I'm never going to play this game again, whatever, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to play this when Corey wants to play it because it's about playing with her. Changes things, changes the dynamic. You need to relook at your approach to whatever it is that you're doing or trying to accomplish with a fresh perspective. I'm going to play some melodies, and I'm not even going to try to write music today, but I'm just going to make some melodies, and then I'm going to save them, and then I'm going to listen back to them because that's one thing that I can do that's kind of fun. And then maybe if it inspires me down the line to make something else, then I'll do that. But it's becoming more flexible again, right? It's changing the idea of your workflow and allowing you to kind of be like, yo, maybe I don't have to sit down and write a whole track in 4 hours. I can like piece it together, or I can do sound design in a separate session or whatever. Oh, this bass is kind of cool. It's like 50% there. Well, maybe I can come back to it later and break that apart as opposed to starting completely from scratch like I always do and then be like, all right, brand new sound, which I got really good at, but I don't even know if that's necessarily worth it because of how much time and how much figurative hair pulling I did with my own expectations. The other thing that you can do is to just, give yourself a timed goal and be like, I'm just going to do this. I'm going to put this work in and I'm going to see where I'm at on the other side. And so you subside your expectation. You subside being hard on yourself in favor of having an objective. That's kind of the thing about, I don't know, serving a community, or when you're, say, in a group of something, you don't really have time to think about yourself. You need to be focused on whatever it is that needs to be done. And I can't express enough how sometimes that can be extremely helpful. But you need to break it down in tasks that you can do, You can't be like, man, I suck at music production, so I'm going to quit my job. I'm going to isolate myself in my room, and I'm only going to eat 500 calories a day and just do sound design and beats for 8 hours a day for a month. Like, come on, that's not realistic. And if you can do that, I still wouldn't recommend it because it's very unhealthy and more harm is going to happen to you than good. But if you can be like, man, I haven't made beats in a long time, so I'm going to download Koala Sampler on my phone and I'm going to spend 15 minutes a day getting a little bit better at sampling and use only what I sample off the internet and just make some cool little ideas that I can play in my car on the way to work. That's totally fucking doable. And if it's not doable to you, then you probably shouldn't be making music in the first place. What's more likely is that you have to get yourself out of the hole to build the motivation to build that habit. You know what I mean? Like, you got to remember that one of the most popular genres in the world, still to this day, is lo-fi. And the bar to entry to making lo-fi is like this big. The bar to entry to making trap music, like this big. Sorry, trap producers. That's not to say that some people can't make an extremely well produced, or like high end production track in that genre, but for what most of the mass, what would you say, listens to, digests, consumes, right? It's really simple stuff. Really simple stuff. I'm sorry, but to that one guy that was like, yo, hi-hat rolls with pitches and stuff is an advanced feature. I'm like, dog, you have a whole, there's my ego talking, but you have a whole world to explore with sound design, and I hope that you find it. But it's a very, you know, low bar, very low barrier entry to making music. Hell, I mean, if you could come up with a chord progression that's four chords and a melody on top of that, just as a song concept, like you've got 20% of the thing written, and then you can apply that to whatever genre you want. You know what I mean? Imagine if you had a whole bank of songs like that, to where you've got four-part chord progression, melodies, counter melody, and that's it. And then you just put that in the vault, and then you spend one day out of the month being like, no, no, ooh, that's the one. I throw a beat over that. Music music production is only as hard as we make it. I think that where I find most people getting like really all up in it and, upset about stuff is the things that are like really high technical requirements. I think that halftime is one of those. I think that drum and bass is one of those. Full on trance production is one of those. A lot of dubstep, not all of it, but a lot of electronic genres that have a lot of texture and a lot of things that you need to know all of these hats in order to be able to perform or to execute rather. Yeah, and that's kind of why we kind of share this thing, right? Because if you're watching my channel, like, man, I really try to go off the deep end with as much stuff as I can on drums, on bass design, on textures, on glitches, on all of this stuff that nobody cares about except for our tiny little community that has an appreciation for it. We don't have to do that every track. We don't have to do it at all if we don't want to. But we can, build towards it, as opposed to being like, I know nothing about music, I'm going to make a drum and bass track that's like going to sound like noisy. It's like, dude, shut up, smack yourself, like, stop. How about you make a drum pattern like Noisia? How about you make a bass riff like Noisia and you use the best basses that you can, but you're focused more so on the competition, or sorry, the composition, not the competition, the composition of it and the placement of it and the rhythm of it, as opposed to why doesn't my neuro bass sound like theirs? Like in hindsight, if you were to ask any normal person, like, shit, if I were to ask, my neighbor or something, I'd be like, here's my neuro bass and here's theirs. Why doesn't my thing sound like that? They'd be like, so fucking what? What is this stupid fart sound? Sometimes you need that. Sometimes you need to remember that nobody cares. And you should also remember that, like, if I've learned anything about music production and anything these days, it is very difficult to impress the people that you admire. I'm going to say that one more time. It is very difficult these days to impress the people that you admire. That's one thing that I've given up on, because the people that I admire is the music that I'm trying to make, and I'm not going to outclass them. It's like, don't try to outbox a boxer. Don't try to out wrestle a wrestler. Sorry, I know analogies from martial arts and all that stuff, but it still applies. Don't try to out halftime a halftime guy. It's not going to work. You need something different. You need something unique. You need a different take on it. If you spend your whole life trying to make music like this one artist, and the only thing that you do is you try to copy them without any kind of fresh ideas or whatever, you're not going to get anywhere. You might improve yourself, but you're going to be really disappointed when that other person, if they hear your stuff or whatever, because we live in an age, thankfully, where that exists. Yeah, you're going to be disappointed because they're going to be like, man, I heard this before. I made this 10 years ago. And you're just like, oh, where? I felt that. It sucks. In any case, I think that it's really easy for people to be like, oh, don't be hard on yourself. Don't, don't do this, don't do this. But in reality, it's going to happen and you need to know how to be more prepared for it as opposed to trying to avoid it and use it as a management tool, as a personal management tool of your own personality rather than, you know, being like, oh, I'm never hard on myself or whatever. Some people say that. You're full of shit. Sorry. Everybody's hard on themselves, especially when we don't meet our own expectations or when we have high hopes for something and it doesn't work out. Disappointment is a part of life, and it is okay to be disappointed in yourself once in a while, but it's what you do with that disappointment that helps you either build on yourself or is what ultimately breaks you down and, is the real setback from the progress that you're trying to make. So those are my thoughts on the matter. Thank you to Pauk for suggesting this video idea, and let me know your thoughts. And yeah, I would also appreciate if you could subscribe to the channel. Check out alchemy.com if you want to support the channel, and I'll see you later.